Hello, and welcome to episode 7 of Afterglow. This one, we're going to be doing something a little different. The previous games I've looked at on here and talked about, they've all been, I would say, mainstream in a way. Very, very popular games for the most part. And as I'm sure I brought up earlier, not every game I'm going to be talking about on here is going to be popular or mainstream, but games that have resonated with me over the years. And today's episode is going to be one of them. Might not hit the 15-minute mark like I normally do with this one, because there's not really much to explore after the game came out. This game was never re-released. At least to the best of my knowledge, it's never been re-released. I've never seen it anywhere else. But it's a game that got me into a franchise. So I'm going to set some music to get the mood, and then we're going to be talking about Mechwarrior for the Super Nintendo. Alright, this game really got me into like the first person mech format of the game, which really has only been honestly filled by MechWarrior, maybe to a smaller degree the Battletech games I enjoyed too. They're more tactical though. But this really got me into that universe. And I had never heard of this game before. Never read about it in any of the gaming magazines as a kid. Literally just walked in the rental store, saw a box that had a big giant robot looking thing with gun arms on it, and I'm like, yeah, let's try that. So I got it home, slapped it in the system, and it opens up with this side view of these big armored mechs stomping on the battlefield. And you get to the title screen, and there's a story that starts up whenever you hit the start button, and the guy is more or less looking for vengeance, because, of course he is in this kind of game. But what really stood out to me at first, if you jump right into the gameplay, which the game will allow you to do, but it's not recommended. We'll go into that in a minute. But it's all done in first person. And at the time, you didn't see that very often. Doom was relatively new. At least to me it was. So this was really impressive to look at. Now, granted, you look at it now and you're, looking at the whole 12 to 15 frames per second, and you're like, oh god, how do you play that? At the time, it looked really cool. At least to me it did. But in that first-person view, most of the missions revolve around you having to destroy opposing mechs. Every once in a while, you'll have one where you have to protect a certain area. Not a big fan of those, to be honest, especially with the way I play the game, and I'll explain that in a minute as well. But it's a load of fun. But the game is a lot more than drop in your zone, blow up the enemies, mission successful. It's so much deeper than that. So first of all, your mech, you can completely customize everything. How much armor you have, how fast the engine is, weapon loadouts, how much I think it even did how much ammo you can carry. Might be wrong in that one, but like a huge level of customization. And on top of that, you can buy new mechs and bigger mechs. You can load up more weapons and armor on, but you're a bigger target. You're slower. Smaller mechs can't load up quite as much, but you're much more maneuverable. On top of that, there's a little diner that you can go in and talk to people at, and you can kind of get leads on what missions to take to advance your story in the game. Speaking of missions, there's a garrison headquarters where you go to take on missions. You'll have a list of missions, and what's really cool is that you can negotiate your contract. They'll offer you a certain amount of money, and you can be like, I want to do it for this much money. And they'll either accept it or reject it, but they can even be insulted at your offer. Like if you tried to be like, random numbers here, let's say they offer you a contract for 20,000, and you're like, no, I want to do it for 50,000. You'll get a thing that says, oh, we're not paying you anymore, and they'll knock it down to like 18,000, where it's actually going to cost you money. Now, there is a glitch around that to where you can keep asking for more, one uptick at a time, and they'll accept the contract, and you'll do it again for maybe one more uptick, and they'll accept it again, and you do that until they reject it. But if you just go very, very small incrementally, you won't insult them to where they're like, no, you're not even going to get what we offered you originally. But the way I would play this game, I would start with, as we all did in this game, you start with a really, really light mech. There's a few weapons on it. Has some armor. I would cheese the system. I would strip all the weapons and all the armor off my mech. I would then get the PPC cannon, which is this big laser cannon. It's got a really, really long range, and it doesn't use ammunition. However, here's the deal with a lot of these weapons, they generate heat. And the hotter your mech gets, the closer you get to it automatically shutting down until it can cool. So, I would get this one big PPC cannon, and I would get the biggest motor that I could fit on my mech, or the biggest engine, without it overweighing it. Strip everything else. Strip all the other weapons. Strip all the armor. And then I would load up a mission, and I would backpedal. And I could move faster than any other mech in the game, and I could just take pot shots at them with my PPC until they blew up. And they would continually follow me, so I'd slow down, speed up, make sure that I'm in range, and most of the times their weapons couldn't hit me, because they're, firing machine guns, homing missiles. None of them are using the PPC in the early game. And I can just, cheese the system for easy money, easy upgrades. More or less, I would save money for a much, much larger mech, and then I would load that thing up with homing missiles. And that would be the second part where I would cheese the rest of the game. Big mech, plenty of armor. The only weapon I would use would be homing missiles, and I would just unload. And more or less just do more damage than they did to me. Eventually, the PPC cannon trick does not work. The reason why, one, eventually you'll have to take on defense missions. And for that type of mission, my build will not work, because they'll blow up the area I'm trying to defend instead of coming after me. Secondly, there's different types of terrain in the game, and you don't want to use a weapon that generates a crap ton of heat on a very, very hot planet to begin with, because your heat will just spike out of nowhere. But that's pretty well how I played this game, and to me, it revolutionized my thinking. Like, everyone else got into first-person shooters with Doom, I got into it with Mechwarrior, which is much more of a tactical thing. And I did see Mechwarrior 3050 in the magazines. I'm like, oh, cool, they made a sequel. And then they went isometric perspective, and I was immediately like, oh. I did eventually rent it when it came out, and I tried it, and it was a good game. And I think popular opinion, states that it's actually better than the original, but I much, much prefer the original. And the next Mechwarrior game I got into was Mechwarrior 2 for the PC, but that one we will talk about at a later time. But just going back to it, that's the only version of this game I think that came out was on the Super Nintendo. I don't think it came out for anything else. There might have been a PC version, but I don't remember seeing one at the time, and I haven't even seen one to this day. As a matter of fact, let's have fun, and while we're recording, let's look for Mechwarrior 1 for the PC real quick. Plenty of stuff for Mechwarrior 5, which I would highly recommend. I think Mechwarrior 5 is an absolute blast. But, yeah, I don't see much for Mechwarrior 1 for PC. Stimulating the discussion here, hearing a guy use Google. Let's see, release timeline. Mechwarrior 1989. Then Mechwarrior 1993. That's the Super Nintendo one, 93. So, 89, Mechwarrior 1 came out. Alright, looking at it now, and it looks nothing like the Super Nintendo version. It is a completely different game. Alright. So yeah, the Super Nintendo version was the only one of its kind to come out. Which, I mean, it did build the foundation for these games on consoles. Although the console games were, like, they didn't do first person for the longest time. Like, I remember MechWarrior 3 and 4 on PC were all first person, of course 2. But, like, the other mech games I remember that I played were Mech Assault on the Xbox, which was kind of like an over-the-shoulder one. Those I did enjoy. I thought they were really fun. And I seem to remember there was another mech game. This was also for PC. It was much, much more tactical. It was like overhead. Played more like StarCraft, World of Warcraft, Command and Conquer, one of them. But had a blast with it too. But sadly, like the version that the Super Nintendo got was never ported or anything, and that 14 frames a second thing, it does hurt it a little bit. And I feel like if this game came out on something that was a bit more powerful, it really would have done it some good. And I don't know whether throwing in like a Super FX chip would have made a difference. Maybe if we would have seen a port, man, in that era, I think the Sega would have been the best bet with maybe the 32X or the Sega CD to maybe boost that frame rate up to at least like 20, 24. That's the only negative I had about the game, though. I thought it was a fantastic game, and if you haven't played it, go check it out. And again, I know this is the first game on the podcast that I've talked about that's not really been mainstream. I know Mechwarrior not mainstream. You know, it's kind of like crazy these days, but back then, I think I was the only person who was talking about Mechwarrior in my area. And I had an absolute blast with it. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed me rambling on about Mechwarrior for the Super Nintendo. I'm going to leave you with the main menu music as an outro. And hopefully, I'll see you on the next episode of Afterglow.